Hey there, it's the Board Game Bandit, and today I want to talk about the parallels between games and sports. As much as I hate to admit it, everyone who is semi-serious about gaming is going to be judged negatively because of it at least once. I deal with this much more than I care to admit, and lately it has become more of a nuisance or a curiosity than an insult. I often think about the types of people who make these comments to me, and there was a surprising common trend among them. They all really like watching sports. I don't think that these hobbies are mutually exclusive. In fact, I really enjoy watching some sports, with baseball being my clear favorite. I wish I had time to watch more regularly. It's a struggle to watch one game a year, when years ago I watched over 200 games a year. Yes, I know there are 162 games in a season per team, so do the math. But when I think about why I enjoy watching sports so much, and I think about gaming, the two are more similar than they are different, and if people knew a little bit more about our hobby, they would not be so quick to judge. First, I believe it is easy for people to dismiss anything that isn't part of their world. I'm just as guilty of this as anyone else. As much as I've tried, despite many conversations with people knowledgeable on the subject, I simply do not understand NASCAR or why people follow it. I do not see the draw in watching it, and I would never want to see it live. I've even been guilty of declaring it to not be a sport, which I now admit is a term with an extremely biased definition. Just have a debate with someone over esports like League of Legends and you'll understand what I mean. But what is it about sports that makes it so endearing to watch? There is definitely the excitement factor, as no one knows what's going to happen. I really enjoy watching players trying to perfect their craft, like watching Zach Greinke throw a perfect Bugs Bunny curveball, or watching Greg Maddux paint the outside corner with his fastball. But what I really enjoy, which is something I witness constantly in the sports world, is playing the role of a coach and deciding what to do in a particular situation. For a football example, it's third down and I'm 4 yards away from a first down. Am I running the ball or am I passing? What kind of formation will I use? I see this constantly in a number of sports where everyone plays the role of coach or analyst, assuming that they know what to do in a situation from which they are completely detached. In other words, they are running a simulation of a scenario, evaluating the possible outcomes, and deciding on the best move, unable to affect the outcome directly. Is it just me, or are they playing a board game without actually realizing it? When I play sports, I find fulfillment in both the physical advancement of my skill, assuming it still exists, which it doesn't, as well as the mental component of solving a puzzle. Because sports can definitely be viewed through that lens, there is a question that needs an answer. The count is 3-2, and the batter has fouled off my last 3 fastballs. What am I throwing and where? But as we get older and no longer play sports ourselves, we are left with the mental component as well as the entertainment, and I truly believe that people enjoy the academic aspect of sports, whether or not they realize it. Gaming, to me, is embracing this academic nature without being tied to any one particular subject matter. I can be pretty hard on theme at times, but that is only because I hate when gamers rank it above all else. It's a game, and it should be about mechanics first, in my opinion. But the same concept of mechanics and theme exists in sports. I mentioned earlier that I don't like NASCAR because I don't understand it. But if you really like cars, that is going to be your sport. The theme of racing draws you in, just like a game about superheroes is going to pique my interest. Dungeons & Dragons gets a lot of hate because it immerses people in an imaginary world. But how is that different from rooting for a sports team you have no association with? I have to admit, I am completely guilty of yelling at the television when I see one of my favorite players do something stupid. I also get really emotionally invested when my team suffers a tough loss, and I scream in excitement when I see an amazing play. In both hobbies, we are drawn into a game and immersed in the world that the theme creates. In sports, we are watching real events that we cannot control. But in games, we are controlling a simulation that isn't real. Who's to say that one is better than the other? when the two combined are what we want most in life. I've actually heard someone say that fantasy football is the sports version of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's really hard to argue that. As far as playing sports, I fully accept and endorse the idea of being the best physical version of yourself. I love being able to throw a frisbee in a number of crazy ways just because I can. But I also enjoy being the best intellectual version of myself, which I achieve through gaming. Both parts are equally important, although I tend to favor the intellectual because my sporting skills have vanished over time and they aren't coming back. I often joke that every time I have a bioscreening where they tell me I don't exercise enough, I want to give them a math problem to see if they can solve it, and if not, criticize them for not challenging themselves mentally when they tell me I'm not challenging myself physically. But I know this is wrong, and ultimately it's about trying to be a better person. And if a hobby promotes that, it shouldn't matter what area of your life it improves. In fact, I think the world is trending towards wanting to be smarter, even if we don't realize or acknowledge it. I'm starting to get tired of people who criticize board games while they are playing Candy Crush on their phone, which I understand to not be completely random tapping on your phone. From what I hear, the levels get harder over time, and that means that you must be thinking while doing it to beat the harder levels. For sports fans who say that they don't like to think, it's remarkable how much time they spend analyzing a fairly specific domain area trying to decide the best possible outcome. It's gaming without components, which is still a game. But we as gamers embrace it rather than acknowledging our prejudice against something we don't understand. I'd love to ask sports players, what do you think coaches are doing? They are trying to outsmart their opponents by assessing their resources and picking a strategy. They aren't the ones actually executing the actions, so it's not that much different from a die roll. And when they receive the outcome, they consider what moves they can do next and decide whether or not to alter their strategy. General managers do the same thing when they draft and create a team. Almost everything about sports can be viewed as a board game except for the actual game itself. There is also a level of familiarity and camaraderie that comes with each hobby. When I go to a sporting event like a baseball game, I'm usually wearing some form of Atlanta Braves attire. In that way, I immediately identify with anyone else who also follows that team and is wearing their logo, even though I've never met them before. A lot of my friends love that community because they want friends to watch the game with, and they forge that bond over an outward sign of interest. Gaming is the same way. Going to a new convention can be intimidating for me as it tends to draw out a heavy game crowd, which is one of my least favorite types of gaming. As a result, I might appear lost wandering around, but when I see someone playing a game I recognize, I immediately feel like I belong. Both of these hobbies create communities based on a common single interest, and it's amazing how we could put aside all of our differences and root for that which we're fond of. Finally, both games and sports are about competition. I think both parties would get equally agitated by being told it's just a game. Tell that to the athletes working as hard as they can. No, I'm not being paid to play a game as much as I'd like to be, but I'm just as invested in the outcome. At our core, both athletes and gamers like to win, and we want to influence that victory. In sports, through couchside coaching, we can believe that we are a part of the solution, whereas in gaming, we get to be the solution. Either way, we are still experiencing what to other people will seem like an irrational amount of competitiveness, but we embrace it because it's who we are. When people are passionate about something, the passion overflows. Often, this means accentuating our differences rather than recognizing our similarities, and I see that with sports and gaming. I really wish that sports enthusiasts would take the time to realize that our hobby is not that different from theirs. At the end of the day, it's about decisions and competition. Although they take different forms, at their core they are the same. Perhaps this means catering to the sports community through different themes to help them understand our world better. This hobby has so much to offer, and I want the world to experience it fully, especially when they do not realize what they are missing. The sports community may be an untapped market in the board game industry, but if we learn to think on their level, maybe it doesn't have to be. Thanks for listening. I'm the Board Game Bandit, and our game has just begun.